shedding our skins, we are referring to shedding the layers of stories and beliefs, the holding patterns, our sense of identity that, we've adopted. As Young calls it, it calls it our persona, right? And we put on these masks to wear in order to conform to the images that we are expected of us. But through our own natural evolution, we begin to evolve out of those and come into something more original within ourselves that wants to take hold and take up residency inside and really be expressed through us. Hopefully we all experience multiple times in our life when we experience this kind of shedding an old skin, right? Shedding an old identity and all the behaviors, the beliefs, and the holding patterns that go along with it that reinforce it. I hope we've all experienced that multiple times. But here's the thing, right? Traditional cultural societies, they knew about these times and they structured seasonal activities to support people who were going through them. So there was support. It was known, it was expected. And so they had these detailed processes of helping people navigate their transformation. And they call these times of initiation. Now, initiation, right, means to initiate, means to begin anew, but it also refers to a kind of death, right? There's this death process that occurs. So it's not just beginning brand new, it's letting old holding patterns and identities die. And so there's this emergence, just like a snake shedding its skin. And that's a very important distinction because it's not just about receiving something, it's evolving out of something into something more original and refined. That's really important. And so these times, right, of shedding our old skins and these behaviors, our identities, well, it can be quite intense. It can be really uncomfortable if you're doing it right. And so there are often times when we quite don't know who we are or where we are in life. Like we suddenly, everything we thought we had built our foundation on may suddenly not be there. And so we're there just wondering, like, what are we to do? What has this all meant? But what is comforting, right, and can give us a greater sense of reassurance is that these moments of shedding our skins at these very key moments in our life, well, they're embedded within us. They're embedded within us. And these moments of shedding our skin are what connects us to that greater cyclic web of life, of nature, right, that we are a part of, right? It's ever expanding and contracting, ever shedding its leaves so that it can regrow them back the next spring into something new. As they say in Thailand, same, but different. Slide into that. Can we avoid these transitions? The answer is very simply no. No. Eventually, even in our modern rush and velocity of living, right, this ancient connection of being of nature begins to catch up with us. A deeper part of ourselves catches up with us, becomes ripe within us. It's a good thing, right? When we enter the second half of life, right, we make a very significant shift where, instead of breaking ourselves against life, we suddenly become broken open to the greater depths, right? The deeper layers ready to speak within us. We become ripe enough. And there's honor in that. And the traditional societies, they celebrated that. They didn't celebrate the youth, they celebrated us growing into eldership, where we can contribute our wisdom and our stories. It's a very distinct difference in understanding what it meant to, instead of growing older, we moved into growing into elderhood, or as the Chinese or other traditions call it, growing into the sage. Because at some point, even in our modern life, at some point we just don't care to hold up the momentum and the business as usual activity, right? Something more authentic is wanting to take form and be lived through us. Sound familiar? The answer really is like, it's not really about, we're not being asked to learn anything new. Rather, it's more about our remembering. Right? It's to remember something original within us that we're now ripe enough to take form and be lived through us. That's a very distinct difference. We're in this information age where we think having information is power. And it's part of that spell of always accumulating. But the old ones say, the old crones, the old elders share, grow downwards into yourself, down into something that is wanting to speak from a deeper place, a more original place, right? And what the old ones share is that we are now being invited in. We're being invited in. There's this poem inspired by the Haida people. Listening to these words. Listening to these words. Quiet now. Quiet now. Your grandmother's mother is inviting you in. Here as the full belly moon glimmers on lake waters. Here as the full belly moon glimmers on lake waters. She is inviting you into the ancestral hut of forgotten knowledge. She is inviting you into the ancestral hut of forgotten knowledge. She sings softly with her drum as you sit there by the fire. Even now you are remembering. Even now you are remembering. Feel into those words. There's a hint here that something has been forgotten. Something original to our being. Something original to our being. And in this, there's this invitation to remember what has been forgotten and to come into contact with something more elemental within us, an original kind of belonging with self. We all feel that. It's part of our bone memory. And so the old ones say, somewhere along the line, we lost our original skin and we had to slip into a skin not quite our own. Right? Hence, there's that old saying, not feeling comfortable in your skin. Old traditions knew of the mythos and the stories of where our original skins derived from and how we lost them by a trickster spirit. And when we lost our original skins, we lost our memory. We lost our stories and our songs. We lost the remembrance of the original instructions given to us by Creator with how we are uniquely being dreamt into the world. And the skins that we have adopted, they hold the mask that we have worn so long that we no longer remember. They were just masks to protect us, to help us live life in the context that, we were shown, that we may not have otherwise agreed with. So now we have this closet where we hang all the masks and all the skins we've adopted. And so we're asking, what are your skins? Those skins we wear to hide parts of ourselves. those skins that we wear to blend in, the ones you wear to gain approval, skins and masks you wear to feel safe. And those that we put on in order to limit our sense of identity so we don't have to confront the deeper voice calling us into a greater level of self. Because let's face it, many of us have become comfortable being uncomfortable. And to actually grow into our potential can be quite terrifying. But there comes a time in each of our lives when we catch the scent of our original skin and that ancient primordial connection catches up with us. It is time to bloom, we feel. It is time to bloom, but to reclaim it requires us to shed the skin we've been wearing all this time. But here's the thing, we can't just slip it off. And herein lies the primary challenge and the danger that many face in these times of shedding our old skin. And this is an important moment. The primary challenge. Yeah. Well, anatomically, we have brand new skin every 5 weeks. Every 5 weeks, brand new skin all over our body, right? It's constantly growing back. And so the skin we've slipped on so many cycles ago, it has changed. And we've actually been at the loom. We've actually been at the loom all the while, reweaving it back into the mask, right? And the shapes that we have adopted to keep us safe. And the threads, right, that we're using, right, the threads being woven, well, they are our holding patterns, our fears, our stories, our need to control, our attachment, our behaviors. All these that make up the skin that we've become accustomed to, right? And as I mentioned, many of us have become comfortable being uncomfortable in our own skins. It's what's known, and what's known what appears safe. But at one point, the trembling just beneath the surface of our being begins to give voice to something much deeper inside of us. And we can't help but listen. And that's a potent time. They had ceremonies to help a person make a transition into a new sense of identity as they stepped into a new stage of life. They had the traditions, they had the rituals, they had the practices, and they would actually use masks, right? Masks were used in ceremony to enact a power and a mythos of a story that a person had been captured by. In other words, they gave voice to them and they gave them mythic imagery and powers, so they were seen and they were exaggerated in beautiful ways so they can distance themselves and yet see them and engage with them with a very deliberate way. When they placed on the mask during these ceremonies, they would become fully identified with it. There was no longer their previous self. It was just the mask and that story. And the story would become their story, and there was no discernment between them and the mask and the skin they had just slipped on. And at one point in the ritual, an elder or a shaman, right, they would come with a sharp knife, and as the person stood there in a circle of their people, the shaman would cut the cords that held the mask and the skins on, and that person would shed them. They would see them, they would hold them up and say, thank you. They would thank them for the powers and the experiences that they provided, and then they would offer them into a sacrificial fire as a symbolic gesture of saying, I no longer need them, and I can now stand in my own sovereignty. I no longer need these masks and these skins for protection. I can now stand in my own sovereignty. Yeah. That kind of symbolic act has powerful impact on our psyche, right? It's no longer an intellectual activity at that point. It's now been enacted in front of the whole village. That's powerful. And today, we no longer have these essential rituals. And so we have become so identified with our mask and our skins that we've lost our own sense of personal sovereignty. We now only identify with the limiting stories and the mythos that reinforce the skins that we have adopted. Well, sovereignty, the definition of sovereignty really means personal authority. Now, authority refers to authorship. So it really refers to being embodied in your story that's being lived through you, right? It's letting go of all the other stories that don't really belong to you that you have taken on and really coming close in with the one story that you can truly call your own that's being lived through you. Traditional cultural societies, they were rooted in an oral tradition of storytelling, not because they didn't have a written language, right? They did, but because they knew the power of stories and hence how important it is to be cautious of the stories you took on. See, they knew that we tend to take on stories like spring trees take on leaves, right? That we take on stories based from our wounds, from our success, from our experiences, and they could distort our perception of self and reality. But they also knew the importance of shedding our stories, just like autumn, so that we maintained a sense of that personal sovereignty and we were in personal relationship with what was wanting to be dreamt through us. They knew stories can be like spells that distort and block. They block our personal power. And it was important, so important to cleanse your stories, to take off your mask, take off the skins that we may have slipped on knowingly or unknowingly. They knew how important this was. And so they had yearly rituals and opportunities for people to shed their stories, to come into new relationship with what's wanting to be dreamt through them. Imagine if we had that kind of awareness today, right? Imagine if we had these kinds of rituals and rites of passage to help us come back to our original skin and our personal power, to consistently be aligned with what is uniquely being dreamt through us, the story being lived through us. Imagine if we had that today. When we begin to shed our skins, we are in fact shedding our stories. And if we don't shed our stories, then we'll merely reweave our adopted skins and our masks back on. We'll retake on the personas and the beliefs. And here is where our stories become spells that bind us. So we're breaking spells. Now, in this, we continue to break ourselves against life. Right? We don't shed our skins. We continue to break ourselves against life, instead of being broken open to the hidden layers of life. So what we're asking here is, what are the cords holding your mask and skin on, right? What story is holding them to you, or stories, right? What is now wanting to take form within you and be lived through you in the new now? So it's about coming closer in. See, the deeper layers we're speaking into here is what inside you is ready to reclaim its original form. What inside you is ready to take its original form? What inside of you is wanting to reclaim its voice and its expression? What inside of you is wanting to reclaim its voice and expression? So, what we're doing is we're unearthing our true skin and our personal authorship, where we're no longer letting the opinions and the approval of others be what directs us. Now, old patterns are ready to break. And if you can do so consciously, you come into new relationship with your own story so that your story grounds you in where you came from, where you are, and what's ready to bloom through you so you can stand with greater confidence and power. I'll come back to that poem I shared earlier. Quiet now. Quiet now. You got to be still. You got to be quiet in a place to listen. Your grandmother's mother, right? The ancestors, those who've come before you, your invested dead. Your grandmother's mother is inviting you in. Here as the full belly moon glimmers on lake waters, she is inviting you into the ancestral hut of forgotten knowledge. She is inviting you into the ancestral hut of forgotten knowledge. She sings softly with her drum as you sit here by the fire. These are the ancestral ways, being still, the primal, primordial elements, the drumming, the beating that brings us back home. Even now, you are remembering. Again, you're here in a time of not learning, we're in a time of remembering. Traditionally, we had the rites of passage to ferry us through. Right? We had the mentors and the elders. We had shamans to help steward us through our inner landscape and to ask the questions, right? To ask the questions that lead us to the right questions, that open us to what's ready to take form within us. There's a group of us coming together this autumn who are restoring these original rites of passage, of enacting these rituals of releasing our mask and our skins. We're harvesting our life stories. We're healing our past, and in a poetic, mythic beauty making, right? We are embodying our original skins. And this is, I think, the 6th year that we've been doing this journey. Now, if you're in a time where you're shedding your skins now and you need that support, you need more of this traditional mythic framework, then you can just go to our community website, awakenthesage.com, and you can schedule a free 30-minute conversation with me or just send me an email. Right? These are really intense times, and without these ancestral framework, without these traditional elders, it's very intense, and it can be dangerous to do it on our own. No, we're a potent community who's going through this deep inner work together, right? And we have elders and we have mentors and we have these ways of gathering together to help all of us come together and be a part of this reclaiming the second half of our life. So if any of you are feeling that call, please just go to awakenthesage.com and lean into the stories, the podcasts, the videos, and reach out. You're not alone. You are not alone. And we are meant to do this in togetherness.